Hello everybody, Bruce McGonigal here. So huge news out of British Columbia. David Eby, the Premier, has admitted that Safe Supply failed and that his harm reduction programs of decriminalizing hard drugs have failed.
I was wrong on drug decriminalization and the effect that it would have. I wasn't wrong, but it was not the right policy. The context of the decision, the horrific wave of overdoses, see people living with the effects of some of the overdoses in the street. The idea that people would be able to access treatment if they were less consumed with hiding from the police and illicit activities, breaking into cars and so on and so forth. What it became was a permissive structure that, in the effort to reduce stigma, that it was okay to use drugs anywhere, resulted in really unhappy consequences, not just here in British Columbia, but in other jurisdictions.
So there should be only one recourse now, which is that he needs to resign, and Dr. Bonnie Henry, who recommended all of this horrible policy, needs to go as well. She needs to be fired and investigated for why she turned around and lied to everybody about harm reduction programs. All of the experts that lined up to support harm reduction also need to be terminated, and they should never be allowed to consult with the government on our dime again on anything, because their policies were strictly focusing on what was best for big pharma and cartels at the expense of the lives of British Columbians. Since the BC NDP have come to power and the federal Liberals, the death rate in British Columbia from hard drugs has skyrocketed into the stratosphere, making us one of the most impacted provinces in the world for drug overdose, especially in places like the downtown east side and in northern BC. So get this, folks. The government that just did truth and reconciliation and keeps talking about settler colonialism and past harms has actually been a part of the largest slaughter of First Nations in modern Canadian history. The death rate for First Nations have been so dramatically high from overdose that it has lowered the life expectancy of First Nations from 73 years, being the average that they live, down to 67 years. So it's a loss of 6 years of their life expectancy. And that was just in 4 years. We have no idea of how bad it is now. But you can be guaranteed that it's probably likely even worse, since they are 6 times more likely to die from overdose as opposed to everybody else in BC. And women in First Nations are 12 times more likely to die from overdose than other women. Keep in mind, though, this is predominantly a outbreak of overdose deaths that is killing men. So approximately 80% of those who die from drug overdose in BC are men, which means disproportionately First Nations men are dying in colossal numbers compared to the rest of the population. How is any of that truth and reconciliation, folks? Bonnie Henry herself said that it was settler colonialism and racism that was killing people.
It is a very different type of crisis, and it is a reflection of a lot of things in our society that have been going on for a long time. So it's rooted in colonialism, it's rooted in poverty, it's rooted in social disconnection and racism and other societal things.
She never once admitted that it was her policies that were super soft on drugs and basically the decriminalization of hard drugs that were killing people that were responsible for the deaths. She's a mass murderer. I don't see how you say it any other way. She lied to everybody about the effectiveness of the programs. She swore up and down that handing out free needles to children and safe supply and injection sites, and even funding clinics that tell children to go to injection sites, was a life-saving measure that we needed to do. We saw in British Columbia, even though child overdose deaths is now the leading cause of death in British Columbia, that a Pride event in Nanaimo actually was promoting hard drugs to children. Some of the hardest drugs on the planet: cocaine, heroin, the date rape drug, LSD. These folks were peddling this stuff at a family-friendly event that was attended by preteen children. And that should shock nobody, folks, because we have preteen children getting hooked on fentanyl and other hard drugs, safe supply drugs, and the government solution for that is not to rehabilitate these children, not to detox the children, but to turn around and say, oh, we actually have to maintain a certain amount of tolerance within these children. Otherwise, they're going to be more likely to die from overdose. What kind of lunatic thinks that saving a child is actually keeping them addicted to drugs that are destined to kill them and destined to destroy their lives and the lives of their families until the child dies? We live in a very sick, warped society, folks. And the fact that David Eby's first statement after admitting that safe supply failed and that harm reduction had failed and that the decriminalization of drug failed wasn't to step down shows that he has no intention whatsoever of being responsible for what has happened. Every single person who was a part of the harm reduction strategy, every single person who promoted safe supply drugs as life-saving, and every single person that cheered on injection sites need to be fired, and they need to resign. It's that simple. What would be best for everybody in British Columbia is if we had an election right now. And I'm hoping, with the BC Legislature sitting, starting on Monday, that every single MP or MLA in BC stand up and demand that David Eby resign. Bonnie Henry needs to be immediately terminated, fired with cause directly. And then we need to be able to start suing her, especially the families who have lost children because of her policies, and everybody else that have lost loved ones because the government turned around and purchased 22 million pills, 5 times stronger than morphine, on the taxpayer dime, and then flooded those drugs onto our streets and lied to us about it in the last election. Folks, enough is enough. How many more people need to die in British Columbia? When Quebec has almost twice our population, yet they see around 650 people die every year, and here in BC, we have over 2,000 people dying every year, and yet we have more harm reduction programs than anywhere else in Canada, if not North America. You know these people knew for years that their policies were failing, and they covered it up because all they wanted to do was become the drug dealers themselves. Think about it, folks. They not only became the drug dealers for Big Pharma, they turned around and passed laws to make what they were doing was legal, even when children were dying. We went from 2014, 3 children dying every year from all overdoses, to over 38 children dying in 2022, and that's just from unregulated hard drugs. We know full well from reports that 22% of child overdose deaths in 2022 were on safe supply drugs, and they're not even in the stats that were given out by the BC Coroner Service. So you'd have to tack on at least another 8 children dying from overdose to get to the real figures. And on top of that, you have all of these poor kids that survive the drug overdose but end up with lifelong brain damage, meaning they will need supports for the rest of their lives. And the true horror story of all of this for families is the fact that they have to turn around and care for these children who are still addicted to the drugs and will still be seeking those drugs out. And that's why we're seeing children die in tent cities. That's why we're seeing children abandoned by the BC government and the RCMP or the VPD in the downtown east side of Vancouver. And the Ministry of Child and Family Development themselves say they're aware the child is down there, but it's actually safer for the child to be there because the child's going to seek out the drugs anyways. Think about how mentally insane that is. And we're all forced to pay for it. Parents and loved ones who lost family or their spouses and partners to hard drugs are forced to pay for kids to do hard drugs. It doesn't get much more sadistic than that or fascist than that. It has to stop. David Eby needs to go. Bonnie Henry needs to go. And all of this harm reduction nonsense that is being peddled at little children needs to be recriminalized, and those who pushed it need to be sued into the ground. Take care, everybody. Have a great one.